must go on, so here I am. As always, before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And if you have your own spooky, scary Reddit thread that you would like to share with me to read in a future video, it does not have to be your own, just let your girl know. Email this email right here, which is also available in the description down below. And lastly, if you're enjoying the content and you want to show your favorite ASMR artist some love, here is my tip jar information, which is also available in the description down below. You're probably laying there wondering, girl, what are we reading today? Well, tonight's Ask Reddit asks, a man once said, if you want a good story, just ask any random person if there's ever been an event in their life they cannot explain. Someone almost always has one weird thing that has happened to them. So Reddit, regardless of what you believe about the world, what's your story? The first person says, I'm an ER doctor currently. When I was in med school, we had a chronic respiratory failure patient who was DNR/DNI. During our morning rounds, nurse called us to the bedside for vital sign check. Guy was deader than a block of wood. No pulse, no breathing, pupils fixed and dilated, etc. My senior resident was like, this is a great chance for you to confirm your first dead body. Rewrite up his death note, make arrangements, whatever. An hour later, we get a call by the same nurse. This guy is alive and talking to me. Sure enough, homeboy is wide awake and a chatty Cathy. He got discharged a few days later. I kept tabs on him until I finished med school. He's lived at least another 1.5 years. The next story says, I've posted this before, but my wife used to win radio contests pretty much whenever she wanted to. She won a lot, like, really, a lot. She had no particular technique. This was across multiple radio stations in several cities, and I have no explanation. Examples, but not all. As a teenager, she brought her back to school clothes each year by winning shopping gift cards on the radio. When our daughter was a baby, my wife won a year's supply of diapers, video games, t-shirts, and other items. Years later, she won us dozens of tickets to concerts from KROQ in Los Angeles. We went to the Weenie Roast and Acoustic Christmas, big multiple band concert almost every year. For years, we saw Bongo's Halloween concert multiple years. We saw Jewel at an in-store appearance, and the morning DJs knew my wife well enough that when Jewel was going to teach someone to yodel, the DJ caught my wife's eye to ask silently if she wanted to be the one. She did. My wife flew on a chartered party plane to Vegas to see U2. The ultimate was one time when my brother and his wife were having dinner with us. KROQ was playing in the background and the DJ says, caller 106.7 wins tickets to Acoustic Christmas. My wife casually mentions that we can't go, so she hasn't bothered to win the tickets. Sister-in-law says, what do you mean you haven't bothered to win the tickets? Wife replies, if we could go, I'd win the tickets to go, but we have something else planned and can't go, so I haven't. You can't just win tickets, it's Acoustic Christmas. Sure I can. The sister-in-law slowly and a bit sarcastically, well, we can go, so why don't you win it for us? About an hour later, the very next time, the DJ says, caller 106.7 win tickets to Acoustic Christmas. My wife gets up and casually walks across the room to pick up the phone. She starts dialing, looks up and says, caller 47. Dials 73. Dials 89. Dials. Holds out the phone and says, 106.7. Sister-in-law gets up, incredulous, and takes the phone. Next thing we hear over the radio is caller 106.7, you win, followed by the sister-in-law saying, what? This is not KROQ. But it was. And my wife won one of the hardest tickets to get in Los Angeles, competing against the rest of the city on demand on the very first try. Can I have your wife's luck? Can it just rub off on me? The next story says, when I was a teenager, I got really into fortune telling as a form of entertainment, but I put on a really good show, and my best friend bought me this pack of Titania's oracle cards. I practiced with these by doing readings for friends. I really liked the artwork on them, and people always read what they want into it. One day I did a 2-week ahead reading for my friend Richard. The man and the dog came up. I said this indicated a close male friend. Then the coffin card. I said, don't worry, this usually means a period of waiting. It only means death if it's drawn next to the scythe card. I shouldn't have told him that. The next card was the scythe. The reading basically said a close male friend would die within 2 weeks. This is so The Ring coded, and I hate it. I tried to backpedal and say it could mean a new phase in your friendship, but I could see he was a bit upset by this. I felt awful. This was meant to be fun. Well, I caught up with Richard a couple weeks later. His best friend had died. He and I kind of drifted apart as friends after that. It was a horrible, horrible coincidence. Me and my friend saw a teeny tiny person. This was in the 90s, and there was a really nice pub about a mile where my friend Jason lived, and the walk there from his house took us along one of the canals. This was in England, the West Midlands to be precise. One evening, I'd gone over to his house. We'd walked over to the pub, had a couple of pints, something to eat, and were on our way back. It wasn't late, early evening, and still a decent amount of light. We're walking down the track beside the canal when we hear a splash of water behind us. Turning around, we see about 40 feet away ripples of something moving through the canal towards the bank. Now, both of us keen bird watchers at the time, so we were guessing it was something like a coot or a marhen or a moorhen. So we were both pretty fucking shocked when what looked like a tiny little naked ass man about 8 inches tall climbed out of the water, shook himself, and dashed into the hedgerow. We were both frozen for a few moments before we headed to the spot where the little man had gotten out of the water. Didn't find a trace of him, so we got back to Jason's place and spent a couple of hours trying to rationalize it. But there was no other animal or bird that we could think of that we might mistake for a tiny person. When I was growing up, my dad, and I would sit for hours and watch dragonflies. He and my mom divorced when I was 13, and he moved out of state and couldn't really support himself and a kid, so my mom got custody and moved us to a different state. The invitation was always open for him to visit, but he never did. But we'd talk on the phone a few times a week to stay caught up. He'd gotten a rare type of cancer in his vocal cords and was going to have something surgically removed in there. He called me a few days after the surgery and told me things were looking good, but they were keeping him in the hospital because he had a fever after the surgery. I knew at that point that this was our last conversation. The next day, I was sitting in my truck before work with the window open and a dragonfly landed on my hand. It was November, so there shouldn't have been any around, and I felt like my dad was standing there. About 2 minutes later, I got a call from his friend that was staying with him at the hospital. He said he passed away about 5 minutes before I was around 11, my parents and I went on a trip to Austria, and we went to a theme park. And the theme park was a jumpy thing. There was a 1 meter, 2 meter, and 3 meter pole. You could jump down on this huge cushion. I wanted to try and went straight up to the highest pole. I've jumped down those poles before, a few times, but this time I was just terrified. I don't know why, but all of a sudden I was shaking and scared for my life. It was this deep kind of fear which I never felt before. My mind was telling me not to jump, which didn't make sense because I've jumped down there and it was fun, so I let the kid behind me go first. She died. Holy shit. The cushion had a leak and she broke her neck. She was 9 years old. I climbed down and will never forget this. If I had jumped, I would be dead, and I can't stop feeling like fate wanted me on that day, and not her. The next story says, not me, my father, from his perspective. When I was young, probably 12 or 13, my family lived in a small residential suburb. There was a street lamp right across the street from us that would shine into our living room window at night, so every night before we went to bed, my father would draw the curtain. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. and went to the kitchen to get some water. As I passed through the living room, I noticed a beam of light from the street lamp had made it through a small gap between the curtains, and I had the urge to peek through. What a brave soul, because no, my ass is getting my water and going the fuck back upstairs. I have no business looking out a window at night. Standing under the street lamp was a tall man with a black cap, silver skin, and massive eyes. Those huge bug eyes that you see in alien movies. He was standing there motionless and staring right at me. I quickly ducked down behind my father's recliner. There was no way he could have seen me. The house was completely dark and I barely moved the curtains. After a few minutes of sitting on the floor behind the recliner, I grew curious to see if the man had passed. I looked through the curtains again. I pressed firmly against the other side of the glass, and just from my face was the silver man with bug eyes staring right at me. After a moment frozen in terror, I ran through the house towards my father's room and woke him up, quickly telling him what happened. He grabbed his shotgun and went outside to look around. He didn't find anyone, but there was a set of fresh footprints in the dew that had been collecting on the lawn. My father has recounted this story to me exactly twice, and even though it happened to him some 40 years ago, I could still see the goosebumps on his arms as he recalled the experience. Oh no. No, I hate that. Let's continue. Okay, the next one says, I was measuring ingredients for a cake in my apartment when I dropped my blue plastic half-cup measuring cup. I heard it go dunk as it hit the ground once, and no other sound afterwards. I immediately looked around for it, but it had vanished. By the end of my search, I had removed all my drawers, moved the appliances, and checked inside, under, behind everything in the kitchen and surrounding areas. I've moved 3 times since then and never found it. The next one says, weirdest thing that I could think of is this. When I was a freshman in high school, I started getting really into psychics and stuff, and my friend took me to this palm reading tarot booth at the Renaissance Fair. When I sat down in front of her, she greeted me, then looked behind me, then back at me and said, "You have 4 people behind you." I went into her tent alone. I don't remember much of the reading, just that she mentioned African said no. She said I should get them for the spirit behind me. I left the reading feeling really weird, but again I kind of shrugged it off. 6 months later, I was at Home Depot with my dad. I separated from my dad to look at the flowers and came across some African violets. I bought them, put them in a new pot, and set them on the windowsill when I got home. 2 minutes later, my mom comes in and asks me if I got anything from the store. African violets, I told her. My mom smiled and sighed, then looked at me and said, "You know, those were your grandmother's favorite flowers." My grandmother died 9 years ago when I was 11, and I went back to that booth the following year. They didn't even mention African violets. I know it's not a creepy story or anything, but it kind of weirds me out. I was home sick sometime during high school, 11th or 12th grade. I was sitting in my computer chair playing Skyrim with my dog, who was usually content by himself and never one for affection, came into my room and laid down, staring at the door. Me being alone, and this not being his normal course of action, unnerved me a bit, so I closed my door and went back to playing. Not even 3 minutes later, I hear a voice of my mother calling my name clear as day. She's a school teacher, so she would have been at work. Shitting myself, I try to be as quiet as possible and lower my TV all the way down to make sure I didn't attract whatever I heard, and could hear more clearly, only to hear the bedroom door upstairs slam shut. Sat in my bedroom and noped all day long in silence until my mom came home. I asked her if she was home earlier, and she said no. One of the scariest moments of my life. Must have been in 5th grade when I was sitting on the couch watching TV with my dad. As 10 p.m. rolled around, my dad fell asleep in his lazy boy, as in the nature of fathers. With my dad asleep, I figured I would watch a little more TV before I turned in. While sitting there, I heard, and I remember so vividly, a clown laughing from the room behind me. I was petrified, but eventually mustered the courage to poke my dad awake and tell him what happened. I don't blame the guy for shrugging it off as my imagination, but here I am 10 years later and I still firmly believe my ears were not playing tricks on me that night. Had an accident when I fell asleep driving. Oh my goodness. I went off the road when I reached a T, headed straight into a wooded area going about 50 miles per hour, but ran into a telephone pole's guy's wire. Heavy cable driven into the ground at a 45-degree angle to a pole. Well, that cable was a godsend because it absorbed most of my kinetic energy and significantly slowed me down. To give you an idea of how much energy it absorbed, it cut into the front end of my car about 2 inches, slicing the battery in half in the process. It also pivoted me around 90 degrees, so I was sideways when I went down a hill into the woods, rolled the car about 3 times and ended up on the roof. Completely missed all the trees. I extracted myself from the crash, gathered my stuff, and walked away from the accident completely unharmed. Was wearing my seatbelt. I walked home, which was about 2 miles away. It was 2 a.m. and pre-cell phones. After I got home, I noticed about midway on my right thigh a perfect 1-inch square of fabric was gone from my khaki pants. I'm talking about a perfect square. The edges were so clean, like it was carefully carved with a scalpel. No cuts or scrapes on the skin of my thigh. It was surreal and it creeped me out. I believe that after I die, I'll be presented with this 1-inch piece of khaki fabric and be told, "It wasn't your time." When I went back to the scene the next day, the telephone pole guy wire had snapped. The pole, while still standing, had pulled so hard that where it went into the ground, the hole was elongated about 6 inches before it sprung back. neighbor's robe must have just needed a patch job that night. But dish. Okay, let's continue. This happened over 5 years ago now. My sister, who was 9 at the time, and I, 14 at the time, shared a room with our beds next to each other. Normally our beds were 4 feet apart, but they ended up being directly next to each other one night, probably because at the time she was constantly doing gymnastics on her bed, which would push the mattresses. That night I dreamt of a glass doll with long, dark hair. I remember feeling like I needed to protect it. I tried my best to keep it safe, promising it would be okay. But as I said these words, the doll's hair began falling out. I dropped the doll and it shattered. With the help of the doctors, the doll was glued back together again, and her hair grew back. When I woke up, I felt like crying. I didn't understand that dream. I noticed my head had left my pillow at some point, and it was against my sister's head. When she finally woke up, she told me about her dream. It was the same. By this point, I was totally freaked out, but she didn't believe me when I told her. I guess she thought I was messing with her. 6 months later, my sister was diagnosed with cancer. She ended up losing all her hair, and like the dream, her hair grew back and she got better. She doesn't remember this happening, and I'm still just confused about it all. In a way, I'm thankful for the dream because I got to somewhat emotionally brace myself for what was to come. I don't really tell anyone about it because it doesn't seem real, and I'm pretty sure I'd sound crazy. LOL. Anyway, thanks for reading if you did. This one gave me chills. Oh my goodness. Once, on my birthday, I was in the kitchen and was reading some schedule on the fridge when all of a sudden I heard the birthday song being whistled behind me. Like, almost right behind me, like, right close to my ear. I mindlessly began to hum along. Then it hit me. I was alone at home, and I had no fucking clue where, who, or what it came from, even to this day. I ran out of my house and didn't come back for the rest of the day. I was sitting in my room reading a book facing my open door. Saw my brother walk past into his bedroom next to mine. Heard him close the door. 30 seconds later, my dad comes up to my room, ashen-faced. "Where's your brother?" he asked me. "In his room," I answered without hesitation. "No, he's not." My dad continues to look absolutely horrified. "Your brother's not home." We check his room. It's empty. We both saw the same, whatever it was, walk into my brother's room. Still gives me goosebumps. The person wrote more. For everyone asking, my brother was out with friends. He didn't come home for several hours. It was a second story with a straight down drop and hard to open window. So no chance of a prank or window exit. We didn't tell my brother until we moved into a new house. My dad got a better look at the thing than I did. He asked where my brother was so that I would have to independently confirm that I'd seen someone, that the someone looked like my brother, and that it had entered my brother's room. He's clever that way. There was one time my parents were house sitting for the neighbors, feeding their dog and stuff. One time while we were there, I was chilling in the living room and saw someone go upstairs. I assumed it was my dad because he had a pair of black dress shoes on that were similar to the ones my dad wore to work. A minute later, I go into the kitchen and my dad is in the room with my mom, talking, and he's wearing sandals. I have no idea who it was that I saw because there was 100% no one else supposed to be in the house at that time. By the way, I went up there and did a quick check, saw nothing, but I also didn't look very hard because younger me was very freaked out and quick to assume it was a ghost. Okay. Last one. When I was in the 3rd grade, I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and seeing the silhouette of a woman standing in my door. She definitely wasn't my mom, and I just stared at her for a bit, a little scared, just a little, but not scared enough to really do anything. Eventually, I heard a voice in my head that wasn't mine say, "She won't hurt you." So I almost immediately went back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I told my mom about what happened. I guess earlier that morning before I was awake, both of my brothers said they saw the same woman at their door, but didn't hear the voice. We all physically described the same woman, and she looked eerily similar to our great-grandmother I'm shook. That died before any of us were born. My mother was freaked out. My brothers and I just kind of thought, that's weird, and didn't dwell on it too much. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And if you have your own spooky, scary, unsettling, eerie story that you would like to share with me to read in a future video, make sure to email this email right here, which is also available in the description down below. It does not have to be your own story, okay? Just let your girl know. And lastly, if you're really loving the content and you want to show some love, here's my tip jar information, which is also available in the description down below. Again, thanks for watching. Namaste. Have a nice day,